Next up, we have Gary Rieschel. This is to bring us a little more worldly outlook on what we're dealing with, and we're very fortunate and lucky to have Gary in our wheelhouse to be able to have someone like this on our panel today. We did do a podcast with Gary last week. I'd encourage you to listen to that. That is on explorebigsky.com. Gary's a leading healthcare industry venture capitalist. He's also founding managing partner of Qiming Venture Capitals in China. And he has a home here in Big Sky and has been part of this community for a long time. So Gary, thank you for joining us today. Yeah,
my pleasure, Eric.
Gary, if I could start, and I did ask this question a week ago, and I'd be curious on kind of how it's changed in a week. How would you see that, and how would you kind of describe the current state of COVID in the United States, but also in Montana?
So, I think everyone has access to a lot of information about the spread in the U.S. and the various cities that are struggling. We haven't seen a great flattening of the curve in many places. The state of Washington actually appears to be, entering that phase, at least from some early data, but New York clearly has not yet, and California, it's iffy as to whether or not that will happen. It's interesting because we have a lot of staff in China, and we have a lot of a lot of companies that do healthcare investing in China. And when you talk to them, what China did early on was by taking 60 million people and saying, you can't leave this particular area, no one can go into this particular area. They really reduced the overall exposure in the country to to the virus. Now, whether or not they have a second wave, that's all to be determined. But they were very effective early on by an extremely strict quarantine. At this point in China, if you fly to Beijing, you will not be able to do anything for 14 to 17 days from the time you get on the plane until you complete your quarantine in Beijing. Same thing for Shanghai. And so those are steps that the United States has not yet taken. So I think the U.S. has remained relatively open with people traveling between states, between cities. You see some of the examples where people have probably been overdoing that a little bit. But, so I think it's too early to say that we're anywhere near flattening the curve in the U.S. For Montana, I was just on the phone with Senator Daines, and he mentioned we've had a couple deaths up in the Libby area, people with compromised lungs from the mining and things in that region. So he's doing some fantastic work in terms of actually heading up the Senate efforts on next generation diagnostics, next generation therapeutics, vaccines, and so on. So Montana doesn't appear, at least to me, to be anywhere near the forefront of discussions. Right now, it was China initially. You look at what's happened in Italy, you look at what's happened in the United States. We still don't know the exact vectors on how this has been transmitted. So there's still an awful lot of learning to be done. One thing I would just highlight for folks, if you look at the response, this has really been in the system for, let's say, 3 months, January, February, and March. If you look at what happened during the financial crisis or some other significant events, the 2000 dot-com crash, it literally took 8 to 12 months from the time that you knew there was a problem until the time that you actually saw solutions being propagated in the market. This is actually happening much quicker. No government wants to deliver bad news to its people. So China certainly could have done some things earlier. The US could have done some things earlier. But when you look at the collective responses now, they're actually coming awfully fast. And a great deal of work and energy is being put towards this. Unfortunately, this is not something where you have a quick solution, or you have a 6 month, in 6 months from now, we'll have a vaccine, and so there'll be a cure, if you will. Consider that. So the timeframes don't work in our favor, but the response has actually been quite rapid.
Right. Well, I appreciate that insight. Switching gears, Gary, I'd like to say you're one of the smartest guys I know, especially when it comes to small business, and you've seen a lot of businesses succeed or fail over the years. If you were to be given some advice to the small business owners of Big Sky, what would you tell them right now?
So most small businesses don't really have what I'd call sophisticated planning when you look at, you especially seasonal businesses. So you have enough cash and you kind of manage the business on a month by month or quarter by quarter basis. This is going to be a very difficult time to do that. Um, the reason I would say that is, yes, you're in the shoulder season, but this last month leading up to the middle to end of April is really where a lot of businesses put cash aside for May and June until the summer season picked up. There's a significant chance the summer season won't really pick up. Let's be optimistic that it will, but it may not pick up until July or August. The danger with this bug is without a vaccine in the fall, and there is no chance that there'll be a vaccine in the fall, is that you start to have outbreaks in the end of September, October timeframe, coincident with the flu season, and you wind up with another very, very rapid response appropriately to avert the spread of the virus. What that'll do is that'll put all these small businesses exactly back in the same situation they are now, with 2 to 3 months of uncertainty in a shoulder season heading into the winter timeframe. So I think you need to ask your friends, you need to ask, whoever you can get a hold of, what's the right way to plan your way through this? How do we think about what kind of tools can we make available? So it's one thing to provide people cash. It's something else to provide people tools to where they can actually look realistically at their business and where they're going to be in both 3 months and 6 months. And what would the contingency planning be? I mean, the government's going to do some of that, but I think as a community, there's a great deal of that we can do together.
Excellent. Well, I appreciate that. That's very good advice. Switching back to China, you've obviously got an inside track and knowledge on China with some of your businesses over there and some of the investments. What are you seeing any meaningful breakthroughs happen there? I know some of your companies have actually had some recent breakthroughs with some ventilator success and some cooperation with Italy, and anything that's worth sharing to the audience that can kind of bring some hope to the situation.
Well, I think that what you're in a situation now is it's all hands on deck. So the companies that have the technical capability to assist in this, I think everyone is actually trying to do that. But again, you need to separate the ability to diagnose whether someone is sick or has been exposed to COVID virus. You need to separate that from the ability to treat that, which would be a therapeutic. So you have the diagnostic tools have come very fast. So they're imaging diagnostic tools, 5 minutes, you can do a CT scan, look at your lung and know whether or not you have any virus exposure to your lung. So that's something that's been developed in the last 3 to 4 months. The other diagnostics tools that have been released all are getting fast-tracked by the FDA. So the FDA has stepped up and said, we're eliminating any artificial barriers to getting these into the marketplace. The second phase are the therapeutics. So those are the companies that treat the people that are sick. And we are going to see a number of things approved for that treatment over the course of the next 3, 6, 9, 12 months. The holy grail for these kind of viral infections, though, is a vaccine. And the vaccine process, the absolute earliest you can have a vaccine is Q1 of 2021. What that means is there will not be a vaccine in China or anywhere else in the world for September, October, November, December. So the beginning of the flu season, the beginning of the COVID virus, if it comes back in the fall, and it's somewhat endemic in the system now, so it is probably going to come back in some form in the fall, you will not be able to have a vaccine during that period of time. There's simply not a process that exists to have a safe, tested vaccine in the market during that period.
Okay. Well, that's good, honest truth. So I appreciate that. To steal one from your playbook, you asked me this question right once, and I'm going to ask it back. What is something that you find interesting right now regarding the COVID crisis, and and also maybe looking into the future? What's something that you find interesting in thinking about what this might turn our country or economy into?
So what we're spending quite a bit of time looking at now is the real repercussions for this are not during this period of time. The real repercussions are going to be that 12, 18, 36-month period of time. If you look at what we've just done, we've taken the entire US school system, whether you're a kindergarten student or a university student, and we've put it through the beta test of online education. It will not go back to being the same. So the education system is fundamentally going to change. If you look at working from home, you look at this kind of video conference, there used to be somewhat of a stigma about people who work from home. Well, inside some very large software companies in the Pacific Northwest, they've already productivity is up 25 to 30% by people working from home.
Wow.
So what's happening is people actually are taking this very seriously. They're actually being very productive. So 12, 18, 24 months from now, that also will not change. So corporations are going to look again at who do you need to have in an office? Who can work from home? These are changes that were occurring at very slow rates, but this has just been a huge accelerator on those two factors. The downside to that is, a lot of corporations aren't going to need as much space. We're going to think about our life, our daily life activities differently as a result of this, because you've had a chance to try something that in the past maybe wasn't seen as, maybe you didn't think it was so professional to work from home, or it was something that, again, there was some stigma associated with some of it. All that's gone. So I think those changes are going to stay with us for a very long time.
Excellent. Yeah, that is interesting. That is very interesting. Joe, you got some follow-up questions?
Yeah, I do. Hi, Gary. Good chatting with you again. As Eric mentioned, he and I interviewed you for a podcast on March 19th. Feels like months ago at this stage. But I wanted to ask you, what have been the most noticeable changes from where we were 11 days ago to where we are now?
So I think that again, we've gone from being the U.S. has gone from being maybe a little too optimistic about when you could get back to whatever you want to call normal. So I think now saying end of April as opposed to middle of April, that is a more realistic time frame. Things are not going to be good at the end of April. I mean, Eric referenced the IMAG organization out of Seattle. They're the world's experts on mortality. They think you're going to have peak mortality in the April timeframe, but that doesn't mean that you're not going to be having significant new cases of this into the May timeframe. So I think that anyone who's been optimistic about this has been wrong. And I think that going back 11 days ago to today, I think the realistic point of view is we still don't know. We still don't know, can a child that has been exposed but is not symptomatic, can they transmit this to a teacher? There's so many things about how this bug actually gets transmitted. The cruise ship, they found the bug was alive on the cruise ship. The COVID virus was alive on the cruise 17 days after they cleaned the ship. So there's a series of things about this that we are still learning. So the good news is the response has been very quick, but the response is coming at the time where we're still coming up a very steep learning curve. So again, I would say if you think you have a 30-day problem, you probably have a 60-day problem or a 90-day problem. So don't be optimistic as to when we're going to come out of this. I'm an optimistic person. I mean, my entire life is investing in startups, and so by definition we're optimists in venture capital. But I think this is one where, for your own personal planning as an individual, a small business, don't be optimistic.
Understood. We have a question from Paige from the audience. Do you think this will increase Made in America pharmaceuticals as well as other products?
So there's a great deal of discussion on supply chain relocation in the U.S. There was a lot of it because of the trade talks, prior to this. And again, this is a bit of an accelerator. One example, though, in terms of how difficult that is, there's a series of products called reagents, which are the fundamental building blocks of pharmaceutical products. If you said today you wanted to no longer depend on China or India, which are the two largest importers to the U.S., for reagents, it would be 7 years before you could have approved reagents manufactured in the United States that could go into pharmaceutical products. Wow. And that's what it takes to do the testing, build you're building the facilities. So manufacturing is not about just the product, the entire process, what you have to do from a regulatory standpoint and anything associated with pharmaceuticals. The timeframes are not in our favor. Now, you will absolutely see coming out of this strategic initiative to say we should not be dependent upon this country, we should not be dependent upon that country. It's almost, I hate to use this as an example, but every time there's a shooting, every time there's a crisis, there's this overwhelming response. that then runs into the reality of what it actually takes to make progress. I think a lot of the talk about supply chain rehosting is being done by people who frankly have never built a supply chain somewhere. And when they go and actually face the reality of that, they'll realize it's very difficult.
Yeah, sure thing. We have one last one from Bella. What lessons can we take from this pandemic to better reinforce our global economic and social systems post-crisis?
That'll be actually where all the political leadership in the world is going to have to spend a great deal of time. Two things expose weaknesses in systems. One are tragedies or things like a viral infection. The other is technology, because technology exists to disrupt whatever an existing system looks like. So here you have a perfect storm of the virus comes in and turns a lot of people's lives, a lot of our lives collectively upside down. Technology is sitting there saying, well, we can solve this problem, but we're going to solve it in a way that it hasn't been done before. It's not going to go back to being the way it was. So what I think you're going to have to see is the leadership has to take a look and say, don't pretend that you can go back and just make things the way they were. One of the most disturbing, if you think about financial impact, the Economist Intelligence Unit today published their GDP forecast for the world. The 20 top countries in the world will lose about $5 trillion of production this year. That's the top 20. And those countries are rich enough that they can actually afford to do things like a $2 trillion package to support the economy. Mm-hmm. The other 180 countries in the world don't have those resources.
Sure.
So fundamentally, this is going to be something that almost all of our systems will either have been affected by the virus or by the technology that's a solution to the virus. And I think the leadership is going to have to be much more aware of those trends in order to solve these problems.
Sure. One last, just briefly, I wanted to you mentioned the $2 trillion aid package. I was just curious about your initial take on that.
Well, it's a lot of money. It's not enough money. Mm. And so the right way to think about that is the idea of sending a check to everyone. I think there's a lot of people who shouldn't get checks, and hopefully they'll be very selective in terms of who gets that money. But the idea is, what you really don't want to lose is your job. I mean, it's one thing to not be paid for a week. It's something else to have this uncertainty with all these small and medium-sized businesses where they just don't know who they can employ over the next 3, 6, 9, 12 months. So I think what will happen over time is we will revisit this multiple times as it comes down to how do you guarantee or how do you facilitate employment. Mm-hmm. And I think that $2 trillion is a huge number. It's the largest aid package ever put together by the U.S. government, anyone in the world. It's not going to be enough money.